Hey guys, my guest tonight is Douglas Mulhall, and he's going to be talking about heart disease and the effects of oxidative stress. See you in about 5 minutes. Grab your popcorn and snacks. Find a comfy spot, take a seat or lie down, and let me transport you to a place of fantasy, ghost stories, ancient legends, odd creatures, alien encounters, and other magical topics. You may even decide to join the conversation. From faraway lands to your own backyard, with a small dash of pixie dust. Turn out the lights and open your minds. The journey is about to begin. Whoa! Hey guys! It played by itself again. I gotta figure out what those settings are. There's one, I have like 4 or 5 versions of that, and so I guess that's not the proper version. Sucks to be me. Anyway, welcome. My name is Charlotte. I'm the host of the California Haunts Radio. I am going to be your host for the next hour. I'm also the owner of the California Haunts Paranormal Investigation Team based out of Sacramento, California. I'm going to push my buttons here. We're 45 strong up and down the state, which means if you have a paranormal issue or you think you might have a paranormal issue, we can get to you. It may take us a while. California is this huge state, but we will get to you. And if we can't get to you right away, we have psychics on staff, mediums on staff. I call them psychics. They'll throw things at me. Mediums on staff who could call and assess your situation and maybe in some cases calm things down before we get out there. Okay, welcome. I'm excited, and for people that haven't seen the show before, you're in for a treat today. I am a journalist, and I don't like to cover the same types of stuff all the time. As far as I love paranormal. Don't get me wrong. I mean, I've had my team for a long time, almost 25, 30 years. But the key here is that I'm a journalist, so I like to mix it up. And today's one of those days when I'm mixing it up, and we're going to be talking about heart disease and what might be causing a lot of heart disease. So my guest tonight, Douglas Mulhall, is going to be talking about that. He has a biochem company that is working on helping people with heart disease. So I'm looking forward to talking to him. If you are watching from Facebook, and one of my pages on Facebook, because there's a lot of California haunts over on Facebook, plus my personal page. If you're watching from Facebook and you like what you hear today, please be sure to hit that follow button if you haven't done so already. Plus, if you also like what you hear on Facebook, please hit those thumbs up and the hearts and all that stuff and the smileys, because that moves us up in the algorithms. And by moving up, that means more people get to see the show. Okay. Also, same thing goes for YouTube. We have on our YouTube page at youtube.com/@California Haunts Radio. And if you're watching from there and you like what you hear today, well, there's 570. Excuse me. Oops. Pardon. Never eat before a show. There's more than 571 videos sitting over on YouTube. And again, it's all different topics. So if you peruse all those videos, you're going to find something that really interests you. I guarantee it. And also, if you haven't, if you like what you hear today, please be sure to hit, again, the like buttons and just thumbs up and help us with that algorithm. And if you haven't done so and you're new to watching the show, please be sure to subscribe. There's that little ghost in the bottom right-hand corner, and that's our mascot. And you click on him and the subscribe button comes up. And what that offers you is the ability to be informed or alerted when new shows come out or new shows are ready to come out. Because I run Sunday through Friday, and I usually set the shows up on Saturday night, and so you'll get an early preview on when the shows are going to be out. And speaking of early previews, we also have a Patreon page, and I do a lot of pre-records. And those pre-records, sometimes we'll wait 2 weeks before they even air over on the main California Haunts channel. While I have an offer for over on the Patreon page where you guys can see it early, a week to 2 weeks before anybody else does. And that's one of the benefits, the perks of the Patreon page. Also, guests like Nancy Matz and others, or like the gentleman tonight, may want to go over there and do an extra hour of Q&A with you. And that's one of the benefits as well. Or maybe Nancy Matz will go over there and do readings over there for you, more in-depth readings than what she can do here on the air. So that's the benefit of the Patreon page, and I encourage you to go check it out. Okay. All right. So my guest tonight is Douglas Mulhall, and like I said, he is a biochemist. He owns a biochemical. It's one of those days. He owns a biochemical company, and he has a lot to say about heart heart disease. I have congestive heart failure, and I'm a 10 or 11 year survivor of congestive heart failure, so I'm doing pretty good. So I'm going to call him up. It's going to be a telephone interview, and we'll just take it from there, okay? All right, here we go. Let me get him on the phone. And bear with me while I get the audio set up so that it's all balanced. Gotta love this stuff, right? So we're going to call. I need some dialing music.
Hello, it's Douglas Mulhall.
Hi, this is Charlotte with California Haunts Radio.
Hi, Charlotte.
How are you doing, sir?
I'm pretty good. How are you?
I'm good. I'm good. How's the weather out where you're at?
Today, the weather is pretty nice. The sun is intermittently out, and I'm going to go for a swim.
Oh, man, I'm jealous. Well, I know. Well, it's warmer here, but I mean, not like my pool's not ready, so I just get to hang out in the house today. Anyway, tell me about you, sir.
What would you like to know?
Your background, all that good stuff.
Okay. Well, I am, in relationship to this, I'm co-founder of a biomedical company called Elastrin Therapeutics, which is the first company in the world with a therapy that systematically reverses the damage to the elastic fiber throughout your arteries. That's the company's been going for about 3 years, and we're going to be entering clinical trials in about 18 months. As well, I've spent the past 3 decades working on co-developing healthy products and environments, and using and co-developing an award-winning methodology that is recognized by the US EPA as one of the leading methodologies for evaluating and developing healthy products. A couple of other hats I wear is I am a serial entrepreneur. I was the co-founder and first CEO of the largest national television network in Ukraine in the 1990s, and it has now become the largest TV and radio network in Ukraine, still broadcasting 20 years later.
Fantastic. So you have quite the background.
Well, that betrays how long I've been around. Charlotte, I just noticed, and I might have overlooked it before, I don't know if this matters to you or not. I'm happy to do video. It doesn't, if you prefer that, but any way you like.
Oh, we're okay right now. This is fine. No problem.
Okay.
This is fine. So let's talk about heart disease, because I'm a 10-year survivor of congestive heart failure. And I still to this day don't know what triggered it, but I think it was this combination of like, if you were talking about stress, I think it's a combination of stress and just the lifestyle I had, because as a newspaper reporter, I was always on the run. And then I had a stressful situation at home. So tell me about heart disease.
Okay. Just let me ask you a stupid question first. Are we recording yet?
Yes. We're good. I can do editing. Okay, it's not a problem. I can edit stuff out.
Oh, that's fine. I just wasn't sure. Normally they say I'm hitting the record button.
I forgot. I'm sorry. It's been one of those mornings.
No, that's fine. Oh no, that's quite all right. Okay. So, first of all, let me say why people should be listening to this particular show, this interview. I want to give you a concrete example of this. And I just want to give a personal story of someone who I know. His name is Peter Bartelli, and he used to be a long-haul commercial pilot with United Airlines and Continental. And about 4 years before his retirement, he flunked his FAA stress test. And he was told that he had a blocked stent that had been put into his artery several years previous, and that there was really no way around fixing it to the point where he could fly again, because if they put in more stents, he would exceed the FAA regulations for that type of condition, and so he wasn't going to fly again, and they grounded him. And so, I mean, how many times have you heard this story? You know, someone loses the love of their life, which is, you know, in this case, his work is flying, and is told, no, you know, that's over with. You know, try something else. Well, Peter didn't accept that, and he changed cardiologists. And the cardiologist that he went to was actually quite a conservative cardiologist based in Florida. He was the vice president of the state American Heart Association organization. And he said, well, Peter, I want you to do two things. I want you to change your diet, and I want you to try what at the time was an experimental nutraceutical combination, a food supplement combination, that I have done a study on and seems to be working for my patient. So Peter said, okay, you know, I got nothing to lose. Several months later, after following this cardiologist's advice, Peter passed his FAA stress test with flying colors to the extent that the FAA doctors thought that maybe the original readings had something wrong with them. And the result of that was that Peter Bartelli flew for 10 more years until he voluntarily retired. So this is an example that is happening all around America and all around the world, where people are being told by the standard care approach that there's nothing more that can be done for them. But if they dig a little deeper and take a new approach, they can get results. And this is not an isolated incident. In Florida, at Mount Sinai Medical Center in Miami Beach, the head of cardiology, who is also the head of cardiology at Columbia University, Dr. Gervasio Lamas, had just conducted a 10-year clinical trial of infusions for heart patients who had one heart attack already. It was called the TACT trials, the trial to assess chelation therapy. And this trial he had started to disprove chelation therapy. He thought it didn't work, and he wanted to get rid of it once for all, get rid of this nonsense. And so he convinced the National Institutes of Health to fund a $35 million clinical trial using this approach. Well, no one was more surprised than him 10 years later when the results came out that these trials reduced all-cause mortality in diabetic heart patients by 42%, which is astonishing for any drug company to get that result.
That is huge.
So this was published in the Journal of the American Heart Association and many other journals, and that was in 2017. And as a result of that, Dr. Lamas had 10 patients who were peripheral artery disease patients, which is a disease where the circulation in your legs gets cut off by heart disease. And they were facing imminent amputation of their feet. Their feet had turned black. Their toes had turned black. They had gangrene on their toes. And 25% of people who go through these amputations, and there are 200,000 of them every year in North America, die in the first year. And 50% die within the first 5 years. That's what these patients were facing. Well, with 10 years of clinical trial evidence behind him, Dr. Lamas decided to try this with his peripheral artery disease patients. Of the 7 out of 10 patients who completed the regimen, 40 weeks later, they were all walking around on pink feet, and as Dr. Lamas puts it, in 2 shoes, not 1. So this had never been done before. There had been never a record of reversing peripheral artery disease where the patient was facing imminent amputation. It was an absolutely remarkable result. That is why I wrote this book, because people don't know about this, and we're still cutting off 200,000 feet a year in North America alone, and another 200,000 feet in Europe. What is wrong with this picture?
Wow. That's incredible. So,
Now,
like you,
I realize that doesn't fully answer your question, but
right,
this might.
right.
Why did they get better? Why did they get better when, under standard therapies, they don't?
Hmm.
Well, standard therapies aren't all that bad. They do target a lot of the symptoms of the classic factors that are used to score your heart disease.
Right.
So it's not like they're useless, but they don't target a couple of very important, what I call hidden stresses. And one of those is something called heavy metals. Now, heavy metals are called heavy because they're 5 times heavier than water. Don't tell me why they use that measure, but that's why they're used. And they include lead, cadmium, chromium, gadolinium, which is the stuff that's used in most of our electronics, and a bunch of other rare earth metals. Okay, so when Dr. Lamas did these clinical trials, he measured the heavy metals coming out of patients, both at a baseline, which is the beginning, then after the first infusion, then after 40 weeks. The results were astonishing. 6,000% baseline, some of these heavy metals were above baseline coming out of the urine in these patients. So this infusion was pulling out these heavy metals out of the patient's tissue, and they were peeing it out. As they peed it out, they got better. And so this was really the smoking gun. This was what really showed that the years and years and years of evidence that demonstrated that heavy metals provoke heart disease, this was shown in reverse. It was shown that patients get better when you get rid of the heavy metals. An astonishing result again. And another reason why I wrote the book, because these heavy metals are not on the list of the standard heart disease risk factors that are used to measure you as you go through life. And this explains why, for example, people end up with congestive heart failure and other heart conditions when they don't show up as risks on that scale.
Wow. Isn't there metals in water too?
You make a very good point, and I'm glad you brought it up. These metals have been with us ever since Homo sapiens started walking the earth. They are in our water, they are in our soil, and they occur naturally. Human beings have concentrated them a lot more in effluent, in pesticides in agriculture, all sorts of industrial activities. But the fact is that people have been dying from heart disease for eons. And for example, Egyptian mummies and Ice Age people who were found frozen in the glaciers, the receding glaciers, have all been found to have white lines tracing where their arteries were. Those white lines are calcification. That's hardening of the arteries. These people had heart disease at a young age. This is not new. Now, interestingly enough, the smoke in fires that were used to provide heat and light in those days, as well as the crops that people were growing in those days, all contain heavy metals. Grain crops are very good at uptaking heavy metals from the soil. As luck would have it. So yes, we've been having this issue of this buildup of these heavy metals in our bodies ever since we began having fires and agriculture. So this is nothing. This is nothing new.
I was just, while you were talking about all that stuff, I was thinking about chemtrails too. Assuming there are chemtrails, because the rumors with those is they're dropping metals on us too.
Well, it's one of so many sources of these heavy metals, and keep in mind, the metals aren't the only thing. If you start going down the list of hidden stresses, which is what the book is all about, you come to stealth infections or hidden infections, low-grade infections that aren't detected by standard diagnostics. And this is the other thing I want to emphasize, because people ask the question, well, if this is so obvious, why haven't we been doing something about it? Well, the reason that we haven't been doing something about it is you don't find what you're not looking for.
Right.
And with both low-grade infection and heavy metals, we haven't been looking for them. So the result is that our diagnostics are not designed to find them. When you do a heavy metals panel in your blood tests, they'll show up as within reference. Well, the
Mm-hmm.
reason for that is because the metals are in your tissue. They're not in your blood.
Okay.
So the majority of the metals that are inside you aren't going to show up on your blood test. So the tests need to be changed. And there are tests that can do that. It's the same with low-grade infection. So an example would be the stuff that gives you bad breath and ruins your gums.
Mm-hmm.
Gingivitis. Well, gingivitis has been associated with the chronic inflammation that leads to heart disease. So has the low-grade infection that triggers stomach ulcers, which is called Helicobacter pylori. It has also been linked to the low-grade inflammation that triggers heart disease. None of these are tested for or recognized in the standard risk factors for heart disease.
Hmm. And I guess when we talk low grade stuff too, it could be anything. I mean, it could be IBS, where there's an effect from that. I mean, it could be just even uh, infections that people just overlook, right?
Well, that actually, if you want to see it on steroids, look at COVID. Because the vast majority of people who were hospitalized and died from COVID had heart conditions. Because why? Because they had low-grade inflammation.
Mm-hmm.
And that inflammation turned into an inflammation storm when the COVID-19 virus attacked the linings in their arteries and heart.
Hmm.
And so this is proof positive that these types of infections can have very nasty effects on you. And like I say, COVID was low-grade infection on steroids because
Mm-hmm.
it wasn't low-grade.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. This is all
Now
really.
imagine if we were able to control and get rid of this low-grade infection. What would have happened when COVID came along and
Mm-hmm.
didn't have that low-grade infection to feed on? We don't know the answer to that, but we do know that COVID feeds on low-grade infection.
This is true. This is true. So they've come up with this thing. How do they get that stuff out of you, or how's it processed out?
Well, in the heavy metals, I explained earlier that
Right.
and there are two methods, but they're both similar. Actually,
Mm-hmm.
there's more than two methods.
Mm-hmm.
There are all sorts of natural ingredients that will grab some heavy metals and get them out of you. Like, for example, cilantro will grab aluminum and other heavy metals and take it out of you. Other things like very common in food additives. A lot of people have heard of this called EDTA,
Mm-hmm.
which is a synthetic, but it's actually derived from natural sources quite often. And EDTA is used in chelation that was the topic of the focus of this trial to assess chelation therapy done by Dr. Lamas, who
Mm-hmm.
I spoke of earlier.
Mm-hmm.
So this type of chelation grabs a lot of these heavy metals and you pee them out. This is done through an intravenous infusion. You have to go to a doctor's office for 2 or 3 hours a week and have this infusion. However, that tends to be inconvenient for a lot of patients and can be expensive if it's not covered by insurance. So there is also an oral. There are several oral approaches to this chelation. One of them is a product that's been on the market for 20 years. It's called Nanobacteria, and it's made by a company called Nanobioticpharma.com. I'm not paid to promote their product. I can just tell you that I've interviewed the doctors and patients, the cardiologists that are using it. They say it works. They say it's effective, and so there are these different methods and products out there, and the reason I emphasize that there are many of them is because there's many choices.
Mm-hmm.
So this isn't like promoting one miracle cure, because none of these are cures. Let's be clear about that. The cure to heart disease is going to come along when we learn how to stop the body from turning against itself when you have these injuries. That is going to involve some pretty sophisticated stuff. But what these therapies is that they limit and reverse the damage. And that is the next best thing that is not usually covered by standard therapies. So not a cure, but able to reverse the damage, and that keeps you going a lot better than you can with just standard therapies. The other thing I want to emphasize is that some of these therapies are used alongside standard therapies
Hmm.
so that they have synergistic effects as well. Now, on the infections, Nanobacteria X, for example, is targeted at nanoscale infections. So, but the infection one is a lot less explored.
Hmm.
You know, there's a lot less experience with what happens when you reduce this total infection load for multiple low-grade infections. It's an underexplored area.
So when you go in to see your cardiologist, and and you might be a candidate, you might be on your way to heart disease, or you've already got heart disease. What do you ask him to look at then? Is there, like you say, is there a separate blood test for this stuff, or because you say it's in the tissues? So what kind of testing would that entail?
Right. Well, first thing is, be clear. I'm not a physician, so I'm not giving anyone
Okay.
medical advice.
Okay.
But if I was going into my cardiologist, the first thing I would say is, are you ready to keep an open eye? Because, and this is what I cover in the book, there's a lot of presuppositions that are carried around by cardiologists, not because they're bad people, but because that's the way they're trained.
Right.
And their training does not include my training. My training is in the effects of our environment on our health. And cardiologists will tell you that they don't take hardly any training in the epigenetic impacts of environment on cardiovascular health. It's just not in their training. So of course, they're a lot of them are reluctant to go after that because they just don't have the expertise in the area. So the first thing I would ask is, are you ready to keep an open mind on this? And are you ready to look at what some other cardiologists are already doing, including guys like Cardiovascular and Jim Roberts in Ohio, and other cardiologists, around the country, Joel Kahn out of Michigan. These cardiologists are all working on these types of approaches. And if they say no, well, you know where you're at. But if they say yes, okay, you go to step 2. And basically, step 2 is hand them the book. And say, well, have a look and tell me what you think. And that's one reason why I wrote the book. It's not written. It's written for people who are not professional physicians,
right,
not professional scientists. But it takes that science. It describes it in plain terms, but it has 700 scientific references that cardiologists can go and look at themselves.
Well, I get what you mean about hopefully getting an open-minded cardiologist. The first one that I had was very open-minded, and when she told me, well, you have to go on a certain diet, I said, well, I would like to try some different things, and she says, well, bring the books into me. Let me see what they are before you do it. So I think she would have been a great candidate for this. I don't know about the guy I have now, but I think she would have been great. How long does it take to go from the testing stage on something like this to being put out in the public?
Well, all of this is available in the public right now. Every single thing that I've talked about. There's a whole bunch of other therapies that are coming down the pipe, including therapies that repair the elastic in your arteries that are now in clinical trial. Wow. And that's what the book covers. It's called, What's Coming Down the Pipe.
Right.
So there's what's available today. And one thing I want to emphasize, people look at these therapies and they say, gee, that looks expensive if it's not covered by my insurance. Well, the problem with insurance is that a lot of patients don't fully comprehend or don't fully appreciate until it's too late the hidden costs that are not covered by insurance, including the costs of equipment, at-home help, transportation, all kinds of things that are not covered. And by the time it's all added up, plus your copay provision, which is often substantial, you end up with a very substantial bill. So when you start, and by the way, the reason I'm saying this is because an economic analysis was done by Dr. Lama's group by comparison, and they found that the therapy that they're working with reduces costs by 30 to 70%, I believe, approximately, over these conventional therapies. So it's the affordability affordability factor becomes quite important, and it's quite important to understand how to calculate that affordability factor, and you need to factor in your own copay provisions and things that aren't covered by insurance.
Well, it's how I mean, like how cost. I mean, what's the cost for something like this? Because you say the insurance might not cover the cost on this stuff. So what are we looking at cost wise for something like this?
Right. There's no instant answer to that. It varies quite widely. For example, with chelation therapy, you can go anywhere from $150 per session to $500 per session, depending on what you're getting, where you are, how expensive your doctor is, et cetera, et cetera. And that I'm just going by what the published information is on the TACT clinical trials,
Mm-hmm.
and that was done once a week for 40 weeks, so you can do the math. That might seem expensive, but I can tell you that one uninsured ambulance visit will cover that whole thing real fast.
Right, right.
Especially if you're out on holiday. So, and as both Dr. Lamas and Gary Mazot, who invented the Nanobacteria formula, say, it's cheaper than being dead.
Absolutely.
There's a famous cartoon in the New Yorker, where the doctor says to his executive patient, "What suits your busy schedule better, exercising an hour a day or being dead 24 hours a day?" So, and you have to pay attention to that when you're talking about relative cost, because most cardiologists will tell you that currently, although it's changing, the standard therapies don't prevent or stop the progression of heart disease. They just slow it down.
Mm-hmm.
And these therapies are reversing the damage. Then you get to the oral. Oral can run anywhere between $150 to $200 a month for 6 to 12 months.
Mm-hmm.
That's less expensive.
Right.
So it really it depends on, and also keep in mind these are combined with dietary approaches, plant-based diets. I'll just give an example: Caldwell Esselstyn Jr., whose very famous book, Prevent and Reverse Heart Disease, is still on the bestseller list after many, many years. I have a lot of respect for him. I cover him in the book. He's very heavy on the plant-based diet approach, as is Joel Kahn. And many of these cardiologists have published dietary books that should be taken into account along with these therapies. And that type of dietary approach does not have to be expensive. I'm on a plant-based diet. I don't spend any more, and I probably spend less than people who are on an animal-based diet.
Mm-hmm.
So cost is really not a factor when you're talking about these types of nutritional approaches. So when you take the whole package together, it's pretty competitive with
Right.
conventional therapy.
Well,
it's actually more than competitive.
Well, really, I mean, I used to pay out of pocket when I first was diagnosed. I used to pay out of pocket for my echoes. When I'd have to go in, and really, I was paying like anywhere from $300 to $500 per echo. So I mean, it's actually in line with that. So that's not bad.
Yeah, and also there are cheaper alternatives now. For example, what's known as the CIMT, which is a handheld ultrasound device. It's basically the carotid intima media thickness test. The carotid artery is the one that runs up your neck.
Mm-hmm.
And they just take a handheld ultrasound device and run it down your neck. It's painless. It has no effect on you whatsoever. And in 5 minutes, they can see the thickness of your artery walls and if there's any buildup of plaque or calcification. And these machines have gotten really good, and they can run you anywhere from $100 to $200 for that test.
Mm-hmm.
And that's a test that's often worth having. I've had it several times, and I've seen comparable results over time. So that's an example of things, and sometimes that is covered by insurance. The CIMT test is more and more being covered by medical insurance.
It's amazing how far they've come, with this stuff. Since I was diagnosed, even I've done tests that I didn't even know they would do.
No, you're right. You're right, and the ground is changing. It's not to say standard therapies are
Right.
moving in this direction, and that's nothing but good news.
Absolutely. Absolutely. I had
Now,
another. Go ahead. Go ahead.
apologize. Go ahead.
No, go ahead.
Well, I was just going to say that there's a completely different kind of therapy that isn't therapeutic at all, and that is the places where we spend 85% of our lives, indoors.
Mm-hmm.
When people talk about the environment, they always think about the outside and Mother Nature. Well, guess what? Most of us spend more than 80% of our lives indoors. These are human-made environments. They contain all kinds of stuff that we breathe. They control our air quality, and they can either be heart disease factories or they can be heart disease therapies, depending on the quality of the building that you're living in. And that you can have an impact on. And that's one of my specialties. I've spent the past 30 years working on building healthy building environments that are measurably improving air quality and reducing these harmful particulates that contain these heavy metals that we're all breathing every day. So this is an angle that most people don't even think about when they think about heart disease. But in fact, the studies show that contaminated air quality is a leading cause of premature death. So it's very, very important.
But
And that's something that people can have an impact on in their own lives. So there's a lot of things that people can do. They can change their own diet. They can improve the air quality in the places where they live. This is all at people's hands. And again, I emphasize this isn't medical advice. I'm just saying that the information is out there. It's in the book. You just need to read it.
But isn't it true that, I mean, like our age group, we grew up with all that lead-based paint and all that stuff. So I mean, we've been breathing that in this whole time, and I mean, is it our group that has more heart disease than the younger set, or is it the opposite, or is it just pretty much even?
Good point. It starts from the day you're born. So, children who've died at a young age for other reasons. The autopsies have shown they have fatty streaks in the walls of their arteries. This is the beginning of heart disease.
Right.
It starts very young. This immune response that turns your body against you, this chronic inflammatory response to all of these environmental factors, it starts from even before you're born. And so the goal is to minimize those types of hidden stresses. You're never going to get rid of them. And by the way, stress can be a good thing. It can be healthy. It can make you stronger. So it's not like stress is always a negative thing. So you want to, maximize the good stress, minimize the bad stress. And answering your question directly, this starts right from the beginning. So anyone who's a millennial or Gen Y or Gen Z right now, I can tell you, you're not immune. Get with the program and pay attention. And also, all those generations have one thing in common. Their parents are getting very expensively sick and old, and a lot of them have got to be supported by their kids. So those kids have a real vested economic interest in making sure that their parents stay healthy. So it's not just them, but it's also the economic benefits. In Japan, for example, this is the number one cause of economic hardship. Younger generation having to support their parents.
And the other question I had for you was, is it very hard to talk to doctors about this, or like you say, just go in and ask them about it and take the book in and show them?
It goes right across the spectrum. It depends entirely on the individual physician. That's for sure. So I certainly would not try and paint anyone with a brush. It's up to the patient and their doctor to figure this out together. The only thing is to make sure that they have information that's available to them. What I do is I spend a lot of time in the book talking about prejudice and bias. And again, this is something that Dr. Lamas has brought up, and also Gary Mazot has brought up, that bias in medicine is a huge issue. We call it the tomato effect. because for a very simple reason. For 2 centuries in the colonial United States and after independence, no one grew and ate tomatoes because someone got the bright idea somewhere along the line that tomatoes come from the deadly nightshade plant, therefore you would die if you ate them. Now, all these people were coming from Europe, where people have been growing tomatoes for quite some time and eating them. And in Peru, they'd been eating them for 2,000 years, but never mind. Someone got the idea in the colonies that this was poisonous stuff, and the fake news made it through for 200 years. No one ate these tomatoes until one day in Salem, New Jersey, an enterprising farmer and merchant walked into the town square and ate a bushel load of tomatoes in front of the local media, and lo and behold, didn't get sick and didn't die. And that was the end of it. And that's why it's called the tomato effect. And that term is not coined by me. It was coined by the Lancet Medical Journal in 1984.
Very interesting.
And it is used to describe why physicians don't use therapies that are proven to work. So it's called the tomato effect.
I've heard of that tomato thing. My other thing I was thinking is that when you do go in to see your physician or your cardiologist, it always helps to have the information in hand or have really done your research on it before you talk with them, because they may not be aware of it.
Yeah, because why? Because they are time deficient. I mean, they're so busy seeing patients, they don't have time to do research. They try and pay attention. They try and take their training courses. They're overloaded. COVID has driven everyone through the floor, and they just don't have a chance. So yes, it is largely up to the patient to help to provide this type of information and then ask their physician's opinion.
Because when you were talking about like these low grade infections and stuff, I mean, there's times when you go to the doctor and you only got maybe 5 minutes with your doctor, if that, to see him. And okay, what are you coming in for? Blah blah, blah blah, and that's it. And you may have these other infections that you think, well, it's not really that bad, so I'm not going to go over that. I'm just going to forget about that and just concentrate on whatever's really bothering me at this point. And maybe patients.
So take the 5 minutes to hand them the book and say, I'll be back in a month.
Yeah.
I mean, you shouldn't do that if you're really, if you've got a big problem.
Right.
But, that's one way to handle it.
So let's talk about, the calcium in the arteries and stuff. How does that start to build up? What causes the buildup on that?
Another good question. So, I have an earlier book out called Calcium Bomb. It was published 20 years ago, and it talks about exactly this. So, calcification is, in fact, largely responsible for hardening of the arteries. Calcification is the buildup of calcium phosphate first in the walls of your arteries, and then in the plaque that populates your arteries. One or the other, or both. There's a big argument over which comes first. But the question is, what triggers it? Well, it turns out that what triggers it is damage that's done to the elastic in the walls of your arteries. When this elastic is damaged, as it frequently is by a whole range of things, heavy metals, infections, even the speed of your blood cells bumping along the lining of your arteries is constantly injuring the artery, and the artery is constantly repairing itself. But as you get older, it gets more and more problematic as you get these buildups. So what happens is the elastic has a shielding around it to protect it. When that shielding gets knocked off, there's a protein in the elastic that sends out a call for help. It provokes an inflammation response, an inflammatory response. And so your genes trigger this inflammatory response and send numbers of cells out there that have this inflammatory gene, and they send it off to clean up the damage so that the stuff can be repaired and new tissue can be built. Unfortunately, in the case of heavy metals and stealth infections, when the body can't get rid of it, into a vicious cycle.
Mm-hmm.
And so you have this cycle of injury, inflammation, injury, inflammation. And guess what happens when the cycle becomes chronic? The next step is the body tries to wall it off
Mm-hmm.
because inflammation didn't work. Well, what does it use to wall it off? A nice solid concrete substance called calcium phosphate. That is calcification. And so it makes perfect sense when you think about it. And calcification can be very useful. If you have an injury, I'll just give you an example. When I was skiing one day, I froze my earlobe, and I ended up with a lump in it. And about 7 months later, I was fiddling with my ear, and this big lump came out in my hand.
Wow.
And it was calcified. Well, body had calcified all around the dead tissue and popped it out. And this is called a very productive use of calcification. Mm-hmm. And after that, then your body decalcifies around that area once it's gotten rid of the problem. But when it's chronic, it doesn't go away. So to be clear, calcification can be beneficial with injuries, but the chronic calcification is another beast entirely. So then you get back to, okay, how do you get rid of this calcification?
Uh-huh.
And some of these clinical studies have shown that some of these oral chelators, for example, have been effective in reducing the calcium scores in patients. So you've got this combination going on. You're getting rid of heavy metals. You're reducing the calcification. It's an integrated approach to the whole thing. And there's some indication that dietary regimes can also stop that vicious cycle because they're reducing the inflammatory response. And I hope what I'm being clear on here is there's a whole range of therapies, and that's why I wrote the book, was to so people could become familiar with what might work for them for their personal situation. That is called personalized medicine, and it's up to the patient and their doctor to work that out.
So they've done the studies on or he's done a small sample study. So where does it go next? Does it have to go to the FDA or anything like that for approval, or are these things already on the market?
Well, you're right. You're right on with the questions today, even though we haven't rehearsed them. So yes, there was a second study after the first trial to assess chelation therapy, which was done with 1,700 patients, of which about 600 were diabetic heart patients.
Mm-hmm.
The diabetic results were so compelling that the NIH financed another $30 million study called TACT-2. And its results are due at the end of this year. So everyone is waiting with bated breath to see what happens with the second clinical trial. The FDA has said, depending on the results of that study, they'll look at the possibility of designating this therapy for that type of approach, but it's entirely subject to those results. And it might be limited to the application for diabetic patients. So that's an example.
Okay. So but people can still go into their doctors and ask about this, right? Even though it's not officially approved.
Chelation therapy is practiced across the United States. But I'd like to emphasize, there's different types of chelation. This particular type of chelation was done according to what's known as the ACAM protocol. I'm sorry, it skips my mind right now. I'll come back to that. But it's the national protocol for chelation, and it involves not just using EDTA, but it includes vitamins and some supplements. So it's a very specific type of chelation. You'll hear lots of people saying, this chelation stuff, it's awful, it's toxic.
Mm-hmm.
People got sick because of it. Yeah, that was true 25 years ago when they started having experience with it. Some people died because, guess what? Their doctors overdosed them. And guess what? 300,000 people a year around the world are dying from being overdosed with prescription therapies. This is nothing new, and they don't take those therapies off the market because of that. So yes, you have to apply it correctly, and it is applied correctly by authorized physicians with these protocols. So be very, very careful about using this term chelation therapy. It's used as a paintbrush to paint all of these approaches, and that's really really not an accurate portrayal.
Where do you hope to see all this going?
I see this as a bridge to the ultimate personalized medicine, which is where we're going. We're going to medicine being basically tailored to the individual. And these new therapies that are coming down the pipe, for example, the Elastrin repair therapies that are being done by Professor Vivahari and Professor Charles Rice at Clemson University, these are going to transform the way that we approach heart disease. Beyond that are genetic therapies that could alter our genetic response to these injuries. That's a long way off to get it perfected. The problem with genetics, with gene editing, is it's not reversible. Whereas epigenetics, which is turning your genes on and off, that's a different story. And that's also a topic of a different interview, probably. But a lot of the therapies that I'm talking about today have epigenetic effects because their reduction of inflammation causes your genes to turn off the genes that are triggering this inflammation. That's an epigenetic effect. So you can turn that gene on and off. You can't do that with gene editing as effectively because it's permanent in most cases. So that's where I hope to see it going. Epigenetic effects where we can turn these genes on and off. Personalized medicine. And ultimately ending up like the bowhead whale and some species of shark that live 350 years. If smart animals like this, the bowhead whale has an intelligence that is equal to ours. They just don't have hands. They have the same brain to body weight ratio. They live to be 250 to 350 years. There's no reason why we can't.
Absolutely, absolutely. And like you said earlier, kind of digressing back, diet has a lot to do with it as well.
Absolutely. Yes.
I mean, when you talk about going like onto a non-meat diet, because the people think right away, oh my God, it's vegan. Are there differences in like vegan diets?
Yeah, of course there are. And by the way, you can get very sick by going vegan and eating all of the wrong types of foods. Too many fats, too many vegetable oils, all that stuff. So being vegan is no guarantee of being healthy. That's for sure. So you have to be, very careful. A plant-based diet has to be planned carefully. Having said that, I will also add that my wife and colleague is a fantastic plant-based chef, and I have never missed 1 second of animal-based food. I'm also not religious about it. I have the occasional fish once or twice a month.
Right.
So, it's not a political thing with me, although I might add it's the best thing you can do for the planet in terms of if you believe in climate change. This is one of the best ways to reduce climate change because growing animals is one of the largest contributors, point source contributors to climate change gases. There are those people who don't believe in it at all, and to them I say, try it anyways. It's better for you.
Well, I did it when I was first diagnosed. I did that, and I felt a hell of a lot better than I did eating meat, diet. So
Sure.
yeah, I can testify to that. I was just going to ask you. See, it slipped away from me. I'm getting senile in my old age.
Well, and while you're busy being senile, I just want to say the website is calcify.com. It's www.calcify.com, and the name of the book is Discovering the Nature of Longevity. It was introduced recently and opened up at the #1 bestseller in 7 Amazon categories. So it's generating a lot of interest, and you can get it at Amazon.com.
And how long did it take you to write the book?
Well, the calcium bomb was published in 2005, and I've been doing added research ever since then. So this has been a long haul, and so the active writing started about 5 years ago.
Okay. Okay. A lot of
And
research.
just want to add again, it's written in plain language,
Mm-hmm.
but it's supported by more than 700 scientific references, and it has an introduction by one of America's leading cardiologists.
Okay. So my next question is.
I correct myself. It has a foreword
Ah.
by one of America's leading cardiologists.
So here's my last question for you today is you're in Las Vegas, you're standing on the strip, and there's other guys that have books similar to yours. What makes your book stand out?
The thing that makes this book stand out is identifying these hidden stresses. There's a lot of books that, like I said, a lot of the diet books that will help you to reduce your burden. But this actually identifies the science behind what these hidden stresses actually are, especially with a focus on these heavy metals and these low-grade infections, and how total stress load is actually being calculated by some of these more advanced approaches. You won't see that very often, and especially you won't see these three things. Number one, virtually none of these books written for lay audiences focuses on elastin. Hardly anybody's heard of it.
Mm-hmm.
Number two, hardly any of these books focus on the largest space in your body, which is the space between your cells.
Mm-hmm.
It's called the extracellular matrix. It's another kind of matrix. And this extracellular matrix has recently been named the 80th organ in your body, and it's the biggest one. No one is writing about this, and that's where all the action is happening, with all of this inflammation and all of this damage to elastin. It's in between the cells. It's not in the cells themselves. So that's the second thing that you won't see in these other books. The third thing you won't see in these other books is how trillions of tiny blobs, nanometer-sized blobs, are actually running your body's daily business. These blobs are about 100th to 1,000th the size of a cell. They're created by cells, and they contain information packages that are instructed by cells to run your body at a distance. And so all of these things that I just mentioned, you will hardly see at all in any other book. You'll see them in academic books, but you won't see them in books written for the ordinary reader.
Absolutely wonderful. One more question is, what's next for you?
More of the same. We've just started on this, and we need to get the message out there. We need millions of people to listen to programs like yours, and I can only encourage people to listen to your program and then listen to it again, and to tell their friends, because word of mouth is by far the most important replicator on this. So that's what I hope to do, is to continue doing what you and I are doing here today.
Okay, well, thank you so much, and I really appreciate you coming on, sir.
Well, you've done the world a great favor, and I want to thank you for having the advanced thinking and having the courtesy to bring me on the show.
Absolutely, and hopefully we'll get you on later on down the line, too.
That would be wonderful.
Okay, well, thank you so much, sir, and I will go ahead and now show your website contact information on it, before the show ends and all that, so people can see where to get your books and visit your websites.
Great. Do you know when the show might air?
Next week, probably on Thursday.
Fantastic.
Okay, all right, sir.
Next week, Thursday.
Yes.
All right.
All right, thank
Talk
you,
to
sir.
later.
All right, bye-bye.
Okay, bye.
Okay, wow, that was very interesting. And like I said, I have congestive heart failure, so that show is near and dear to my heart. So I'm going to start asking about this stuff. I think it comes down to two. And I believe in diet. I really do. I have been kind of off my diet, lately. We all fall off the wagon, but I believe in diet, because I can tell you it was miraculous when I did get off my original diet that I was on and then started eating a lot more healthier. The big difference in how I felt and the weight I lost and took off and all that. So that has a lot to do with it. But if they can find something like this, and I'm no doctor, I'm just a heart patient that's been, and if they can find something like this to help prevent heart failure and heart issues, and blood pressure problems, fantastic. That's something that we direly need because, who knows what's in our food? Who knows what we're breathing in? Like he said, and yeah, I mean, for years we've been breathing in garbage. Okay, I mean that's a given. Okay, well anyway, thank you so much for joining us tonight, and I really appreciate each and every one of you who watched the show and who listened to the show over the RSS feed. Kind of like today. But I do appreciate you all. So again, if you like the show, share it with 5 people. If you hated the show, share it with 5 of your enemies. Again, we're equal opportunity here at California Haunts Radio. And if you're watching from Facebook and you like what you see and you're on one of our California Haunts pages or even my personal page, click that follow button. Always looking for followers and show me some love. Get that thumbs up going or the heart or the smiley face or whatever there is up there to click on. And if you're on YouTube, same thing. If you haven't subscribed yet and you like what you see tonight, please be sure to subscribe because we're always looking for subscribers. And tell your friends. Tell your friends about the show, because there's all kinds of stuff. Hey, there's this cool show out there out of California. It's a little show, but it's a good show. Okay. Anyway, I want to thank you all again. And as you can see, that ticker is running along the bottom, and that's because California Haunts is a nonprofit. And everything you see here comes out of my pocket, and anything with the paranormal group comes out of my pocket. So if something breaks, I have to pay for it out of pocket. I'm just paying bills like everybody else for internet and all those expenses. If you could find it in your heart to help me out a little bit, that would be great to keep the show on the air. You can do that at PayPal, paypal.me at California Haunts, or you can do that at Venmo and just look up California Haunts. Anyway, I want to thank you and have a great rest of your evening. Let me get it in the right spot. Have a good one. Oh, first I'm going to show you his info. See, I almost forgot. Jeez. One of those days. Here we go. Okay, his websites are ourmolecularfuture.com and calcify.com. And the books are Discovering Nature's Longevity and Our Molecular Future. And the dog. And we've got the calcium bomb and heart disease. Is it cured? And those are available at Amazon.com. And the dog wanted to be on the air today, so that's kind of cool. Okay, I want to again thank you guys, and I will see you tomorrow. Have a great one.